welcome back to my channel. I'm Evelyn, and when I don't sketch and experiment with various art supplies here on YouTube, I sometimes film my painting process for book illustration commissions. And today I'll be showing one of those from this spring, but using an all-time favorite limited palette, the Zorn Palette. It's the palette that got me into acrylic painting, and I hope you enjoy my process and that you will be curious to try out this palette for your work at the end as well. Today I'll start painting my last book interior illustration for Fangs for Nothing. As you can see, it's a very simple scene, right? It's a ballroom interior, everyone wearing fancy clothes, and there will be warm chandelier light in the background. When I originally made the sketch, I immediately thought of the Zorn palette as a color palette option for this illustration, because for these last 3 bonus illustration for the book, which came about because the Kickstarter for the edition reached certain stretch goals, I'm being a bit experimental with my color palettes. The Zorn palette is an old friend of mine that I'm kind of curious to meet again. I think I gave the ivory black to a friend who needed to borrow some acrylics and can't find the red at this point, so I might have given that one away as well. But I do have these 2 still left. You can see how much titanium white I've used. And what I then did over time, as I got used to painting with acrylics and learning about color mixing, I added an ultramarine blue at a later point, just to access a whole different part of the color wheel, and continued painting and slowly expanding my color palette like that. Today my approach is of course a bit different. I normally use a fuller color palette, but want to reduce it down because this ballroom scene with like a golden dress, black suits, maybe a red dress somewhere in the background is just the perfect subject for the Zorn palette, right? Warm leaning, I wanted to have a bit of a classical, elegant feel. But this time I come with options, and we might as well explore some different ones. I have 3 different reds, I do have just yellow ochre, a couple different whites from different brands as well, and some black. I'll do a mixing chart, which hopefully also helps you if you paint in oils or gouache or are just interested in color theory and pigments, and then I'll move on to the actual painting process. If I weren't making any color tests, I'd probably just go with my staples, which is the cadmium red light, yellow ochre, titanium white, and unnamed darkness, which is a Mars black, but the label has scratched off quite a bit. If you're ever unsure about what kind of black you have, and Mars black is an option, you can take a magnet and see if it wants to attach. It won't truly stick to it, but I can definitely feel it kind of wanting to get closer to the iron inside, which is what Mars black is made of, especially if I compare it to something like yellow ochre, where nothing at all happens. But yesterday I went to the art shop and also got this carbon black as a fluid acrylic. I have 2 slightly cooler and darker red options to experiment with. A zinc white, just to see how that changes the tone of the mix overall. Compared to titanium white, it's much more transparent. The titanium white from the Liquitex heavy body acrylic line, and the fluid acrylic titanium white equivalent to the carbon black. Alright, I'm ready to do some color experiments and then get started with my painting. My paint swatches are a bit chaotic. I don't really measure out my mixing ratios or anything like that, I just go by feeling, because that's how I've been mixing during the actual painting process anyway. So these mixing charts are always a way to familiarize myself with my color palette, so that the painting later can be more intuitive as well. I just love the greenish undertone that mixing yellow ochre with carbon black, or most blacks, really can create. I have multiple red options, but my first choice is the cadmium red light. Mixed with just white, it can lean towards a salmon color, but it never looks pink, which I think is important for the spirit of the Zorn palette. Together with yellow ochre, it creates beautiful oranges as well. Mixed with the carbon black or Mars black, it also gives us access to dark, warmer browns. The quinacridone red immediately creates a very different mix with the Mars black, looking like a dark violet or blackberry color, depending on how much I lighten the mix with titanium white. It's so much cooler than the cadmium red light, and while I could create warm red mixes with the yellow ochre, you can see just how cool its undertone is once I mix it with purely titanium white. The Naphthol red is a little less cool, more of a rosy color when mixed with titanium than a cool pink, but still I'm leaning more and more towards just going with my good old cadmium red light. These cooler reds would bring more variety to the kinds of colors I can mix, but the constraint to the warm side of the color wheel is the entire point of my choice of this palette. So I'll keep this one in mind for the future. I think this would make for a fun, limited palette, kind of independent from the illustration today, where I want to focus on warm, golden lighting. One thing to keep in mind with a palette as limited as the Zorn palette, everything is relative. Now that's always true in art and color theory, but here especially. Your yellow ochre and black of choice will step into the role of a green together, and the black with titanium white will be the coolest possible mix, and so take on the role of a blue when placed next to the much warmer colors. It's what makes this limited palette both a challenge and a very simplified approach to paint mixing and seeing color in general. When it comes to white paint, acrylics are way less finicky than oil paints, where trying times dictate a lot of the choices. I'll mostly go with the basic titanium white in both its heavy body and fluid form, and maybe bring in the zinc white when I need a very subtle shift. And honestly, I couldn't really spot the big difference between the carbon and the Mars black in my swatches. The Mars black may be looking a little bit cooler, which is why I picked that one. Also, I only have the carbon black as a fluid and open acrylic paint, so I'd rather use the basic heavy body line as a main color. While picking a black with a cool undertone makes mixing those gray tones that will be our blues and just cool tone in general much easier, you could probably get away with any kind of black for this palette. I'm really happy with my mini color wheel here. Painting with acrylics, I can lighten a color by mixing with white or by using more water or medium to dilute it into transparency. Since the white paint also cools down my colors, I showed both options here for the Mars black, cadmium red light and yellow ochre. Also, mixing the latter two with black, I painted 2 gradients each, one with just the black, one also using white paint to show the grayish colors we can mix here. I think this again shows these nice greenish, kind of sickly looking undertones to the yellow ochre black mix again. And you can see how the titanium white pushes a color towards a cooler tone compared to just the transparency of water with the cadmium red light. So always keep that in mind, especially because titanium white is a very cooling white. It's why, for example, zinc white can be a bit warmer or rather neutral, depending on what you're going for. Though for the Zorn palette, I like having the titanium white as another cool side of my color wheel. The Zorn palette really simplifies all my color mixing choices so much. If you ever feel a bit uninspired and you don't have a very specific color palette in mind, maybe it's a portrait or just a painting with lots of characters on it, so that you would need a variety of light and dark skin tones, I think the Zorn palette can be a great choice for that, to just dive in and see where it takes you and how far you can push it as well. Also, I really enjoy documenting all my color palettes and mixing swatches lately in a sketchbook together. It's fun to flip back through and see what I've already tested and mixed. And honestly, I often forget what kind of paints I used for which painting. I don't have a great memory for that, and flipping back through the sketchbook and seeing which painting used which color wheel, which color palette is a great reminder. I knew that all the most saturated colors would be used on the characters, and that the background, in contrast, will be mostly grey tones. A warmly lit, neutral area that frames the figures in the foreground. So with all my mixing tests to look at and compare my values to, I just dove right in. For the underpainting, or in this case the first paint layer, I usually focus mostly on separating shadow and light, but without the deepest shadows or highlights yet, as I first want to get a feel for the exact values I need. So everything looks a bit muted and subdued until I get to the final color layer, because the darkest shadows and brightest lights, as well as the most saturated colors, usually are also in the most detailed area of a painting to pull the focus there. That means I can just block in these more neutral tones of the background with bristle brushes and filberts, and not worry about details. I'm not using a lot of medium, like the golden retarder fluid or even the open acrylic mediums, because this will be a pretty quick painting. I won't need weeks of blending and reblending and layering for this to work. It's a smaller, very simple book illustration, so the perfect playground to just go in with opaque, fast drying layers from the very start. It might be a bit weird to see me work on the background so much first, because usually I want to make sure the more important parts look good, but I was pretty confident in my color choices with how simple this palette was. So in acrylics, it's much easier to have the background there and paint over the edges once you get to the foreground. So it's really just a time-saving method. I noticed something really awkward about the camera angle I'm filming at. This is a small illustration, only 9 by 12 inches, and I'm sitting very close to the table easel, and the camera has to be far off to the left side so I don't hit it with my shoulder by accident. It makes everything on the left side of the page, or especially the lower left, look much larger due to this camera angle and perspective. You will notice that, for example, Winnie's hand looks giant next to her head, which is deceptively angled much farther away from the camera. I promise it's not this bad once I scan the image and we get the flat frontal view of everything. But I couldn't stop noticing it constantly while editing this footage. As always, when I paint vampires next to living humans, I want to emphasize that difference. Winnie's skin gets a very warm undertone in the shadows with an underpainting or ébauche that focuses on the cadmium red light, and then a lighter layer on top for the midtones with more yellow ochre in it. Alaric's skin doesn't get any of that, only hints of the yellow ochre for a much paler complexion. The yellow ochre shows up in the shadows as Winnie's hair and dress and skin reflect bounce light into those. So it's not even his own color shining through, but him picking up environment colors as if he were a marble statue. I've mentioned these brushes in a recent art haul video as well. I'd used some of the Hua Filberts even years ago, but recently I bought a whole bunch of their different brush lines for acrylic and oil painting, a bit on a whim, just to test out the different types they have and to get access to different sizes. And honestly, they work perfect on this surface for my particular painting style. And look, to be completely honest, if I could just place a wish with the brush fairy and find new brushes under my pillow the next morning, I'd always go for the Rosemary & Co. Eclipse line. Those are just wonderful. But I also paint a lot and go through a lot of brushes, and stocking up on brands that I have to import can get quite expensive. So I'm happy that I found alternatives that work for me, that are easy to find here in Korea. Another brush that still constantly shows up is a tiny Da Vinci synthetic brush, which I really enjoy for details. By the way, beyond the color palette, I did find even more inspiration from Anders Zorn by looking at his paintings to see how he paints figures in the background. And one of the characters I painted even wears a dress that is an homage to one of Zorn's paintings, The Waltz. The main characters are rendered in my usual semi-realistic, stylized method, but I went with rougher brushwork for the background characters and lights, to hint at movement and to match the palette. While this is a very simple composition, I really just enjoyed the painting process so much. Getting to focus on all these subtle changes from yellow to red to dark, cool grays, and then the final highlights with titanium white. that I find to be really eye-catching in this combination. It was also interesting to return to the Zorn palette. I'd started with these 4 paints, not by Golden, but the cheaper ones that I'd mentioned back when I first got into acrylics in 2021, I think. And while my palette has expanded since, it felt very nostalgic and in a way familiar to return to these paints and see what I can do with them now and maybe couldn't in the past, and if they'd work for a finished full illustration. With this interior illustration, all the Fangs for Nothing art is now complete. The Kickstarter has long since wrapped up. This was one of the 3 bonus illustrations from the stretch goals after all. And I'm so happy with everything I learned and explored during this series of illustrations. And it won't be the last time that I paint something for a book by Stephanie. I want to apply what I've learned about color palettes, compositions for book interior art, the more detailed rendering for end papers, and all the art style experiments to my future illustrations, and can't wait to see what those bring, as I learn so much from every single piece I attempt. I hope you enjoyed my dive back into the Zorn palette and would love to hear about your experience with limited palettes as well. Do you have a favorite? If you use the Zorn palette, do you prefer a specific red or black paint or even a different white? I feel like yellow ochre is just a universal choice for it. I've never seen someone using something different, though I imagine a transparent yellow iron oxide or even a raw sienna might work as well. I'm also curious to try the Zorn palette in watercolors one day. I can't quite imagine how it works for mixing cooler tones, lacking a white paint, but I'd be curious to give it a try for a portrait. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.